You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1255. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. You know, whether it's that moment you may be in grad school or you're working at a nonprofit and you're like, you know what, I should start a practice. I think that could bring in some extra income, pay off student loan debt. That's why I started mental wellness counseling, was literally just wanted an extra $1,000 a month to try to put in my pocket, or probably not my pocket, pay for my student loans, pay for the, house upgrades. And then it grew and I kept adding clinicians. And next thing you know, I had 13 clinicians and left my full-time job and was able to do this type of consulting as well. And I absolutely loved it. I really loved the kind of practice that I built, and eventually sold that in 2019. And now I get to talk to people all week long about business, about marketing, about what matters to you as you have a private practice. We want you to love it as well as to thrive. I am so excited today. We have Dr. Joseph Michelli, who is a globally recognized organizational psychologist, best-selling author, and one of the most trusted voices in customer experience and leadership transformation. Joseph is the author of multiple #1 New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers, including The Starbucks Experience, The Zappos Experience, The New Gold Standard about the Ritz-Carlton, Driven to Delight on Mercedes-Benz, and The Airbnb Way. His most recent release is All Business is Personal. Joseph, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
I'm excited to be here. I love your podcast. I've listened to it, and I feel like we're kindred spirits here. So this is exciting.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think that, probably being an organizational psychologist, doing a lot of that work, you got a lot of training, I imagine, in business and how big businesses think. And I still remember in graduate school, maybe this was you, there was a psychologist who figured out on American Airlines that people didn't care if they got 2 tomatoes or 3 tomatoes in their salad. And so they saved, American, millions of dollars a year on like 1 tomato. And I remember thinking to myself, what a stupid application to psychology. But as I now get in the business world, I'm like, no, there's so many cool ways that businesses operate. And I just had this tainted view of the counseling world versus the organizational world. And I love what you've done, and you've helped build that bridge. So maybe help us understand a little bit of your career as you, went from practicing and doing all that to writing all these books. I know that's a lot to cover, but maybe the real question is, what do people get wrong about organizational psychology?
Yeah, I think as an organizational psychologist, I consider myself that after being a clinical psychologist. So it's kind of an interesting journey. I think what people do get wrong is that organizational psychologists aren't necessarily always looking at whether or not you need 3 or 2 tomatoes. I mean, we're not necessarily down in that granular level. We're more likely, at least in my consultative space, there are colleagues who I'm sure are at the tomato place, but my space is a lot more about what are the drivers of intention. Yeah. Either at the organizational level, how do we make our company better, or how do we engage our customers better by understanding the psychology that drives them? There's lots of elements of cognitive psychology and lots of elements of emotional dimensions of psychology as well. So that's kind of where I spend my day.
Yeah, I would love to hear just what you see these large companies doing right that we can then apply into our counseling practices.
Well, I think that the great leaders and the kinds of leaders that I end up writing books about, these are all clients of mine. The ones who actually make it to the book stage are ones who have a clarity of what they want every single customer, or in case of practices clients to experience every time, no excuses. So what do we want them to experience when they arrive on our website for the first time, when they have their first phone contact, when they experience the last contact before they're transitioning to some other provider? What do we want them to feel consistently? And we're not just talking about in the actual session, if you will, but all of the other touch points along the journey, and understanding that, and then training your team to realize we need to execute this differentiated emotional experience at those high value touch points based on evidence, right? Like behavioral economics research showing what is memorable to human beings. How do we execute at those high value moments against what we want every single person to feel every single time? Because that's what drives loyalty and referrals.
What is memorable? Like what makes brands stand out?
Well, first and foremost, making a personal emotional connection. At Zappos, we used to call it a PEC, the personal emotional connection. And the idea is that we have to do more than just transact business. We have to demonstrate that we care for you through our products and offerings, but we care about you. It's to kind of be real blunt about it. We have a give a damn factor about it all. It matters to us how your life is experienced, not just, again, in the delivery of the core product, but all of the elements, enveloping the entire experience in that level of caring as demonstrated by trying to drive an emotional outcome at each touch point.
Now, for therapists, I think that, a lot of us haven't been trained in business at all. So, if I think about the user experience, they're often potential clients are throwing it out there to their closest friends. They're not going to post on Facebook or Instagram, hey, looking for a therapist. But, they may say to a couple of people, hey, I heard you were in therapy. Who do you use? And then they may go to the website. They may, if they need to take insurance, look at that. And then, they come to the intake, they get going in counseling. What do you think therapists probably get wrong or miss that there are opportunities that they could actually improve that user experience?
Yeah, I think from the arrival experience on your website to the phone call to the way you help your clients understand that you're in a referral business, all of those things that are actually very tactical and very thoughtful. And lots of people, I think, open a practice. They are good at their trade. They know how to affect positive change in the life of the person who sits in front of them, or maybe is visually mediated through technology these days. But whatever it might be, they know how to affect that. They don't necessarily know how to create the rival experiences, the branded experience, to not communicate in their branding what differentiates them, what their unique value proposition is from every other therapist who's similarly trained. And once you kind of define that, then you have to execute against it throughout the high value touch points. And all of that to me is where it goes wrong. If you're a practice size where you have many people involved in the delivery of the experience besides just you, how do you get some uniformity so that if I get to see you versus I get to see someone else, yes, there are going to be all kinds of nuances in your clinical style, but the actual branded experience of dealing with every single person in your organization should be similar. You should all be aspiring to the same true north of what a great client or patient experience might look like. How you do it in the mechanics of the session and your treatment plan, that's completely different. But the way everything looks, feels, and is executed should not be just random based on which therapist I get. If you ever get to a point where you're saying, you should probably go see this person, but not this person on our team, you've really failed to create that uniformity.
I think a lot of owners, they're kind of bleeding heart side, have a hard time letting someone go. I had a consulting client that, 6 months ago, he was saying, I just don't think this woman's great. And it ended up being that this lady ended up being hospitalized, didn't tell anyone, and then didn't tell any of her clients and just no-showed for like a week. They just didn't know where she was. And it was like, that's what it took for this person to feel like, oh, they're not a good fit for me.
Maybe it's time to let them go.
Maybe 6 months ago, your intuition was a little more spot on than you thought.
Look, I'm all about being compassionate, but I think you have to be assertively compassionate, right? Yeah. So this idea of accommodating everything and all things and still think you have a cohesive brand, it just doesn't happen. I need to understand what are the wants, needs, and desires of my team members and how do I work with that. But at some point when they go outside of the boundaries of the ability to deliver a great client experience, I need to either coach them back in fairly quickly or determine that no magnitude of coaching will make them a fit for me. And then I just have to encourage them to go to some place where they'll be a better fit.
Yeah. What are some kind of quick ways that owners can be checking in on that? Because they're not going to go sit in on the session for quality. Like, I mean, one thing that comes to mind for me is if you have a team of say 10, and then they're all seeing people about 10 to 15 sessions before they close them out, and then you have one that they see one or two, like looking for those outliers. What are other things that you think should be kind of red flags or at least investigation flags, for people?
Well, I think obviously any of the key performance indicators, are people on time for their appointments? Are they continually running late?
Mm.
And, issues that where you get some feedback from clients. It used to be the case that we wouldn't ask clients about their experience. We just kind of continue to treat them, and the clinical outcomes spoke everything. Well, you want clinical outcomes. You want people to lower their depression scores on screenings, right? You want them to be able to demonstrate all kinds of behavioral improvements in the quality of their lives as a result of their time with you. But in addition to that, you want to make sure that while they're doing that, they're having the best possible experience, that you're on time, that you're communicating effectively, that you're available and approachable within the boundaries of service standards that you've created. All of that to me is pretty important. And so we have to ask that. And if we're in a business as a leader, we may have to send those surveys out, or those pulse surveys, or just have a chat analysis of any interactions that ask questions about those things, so that you're able to get real-time data to help your team perform better against those expectations, those service standards.
So awesome. Well, I want to kind of transition into your new book, All Business is Personal, and then also just talk. We were talking before we started rolling about technology and how technology and people is interacting. Where should we start in regards to that?
Yeah, so this book is about Amazon One Medical. It really was a company called One Medical out of San Francisco. I had consulted for UCLA, and the chief operating officer over there went and ran the Stanford health system, and then on to this One Medical company. One Medical was originally founded by a physician by the name of Tom Lee, who was a Harvard-trained internist. He went on to Stanford Business School to learn his business chops, which I think is a lesson to a lot of clinicians. We need to solidify our business skills. So being part of your community is an example of taking that step. But what Tom really did was he said, I now want to challenge not just iterative design in healthcare, but really optimal design. So why do patients have to sit in a waiting room and an exam room? That was a question he asked. Why do patients have to call us to get an appointment in a time when maybe we could start developing some technologies a decade or more ago? We could develop some technologies where they could schedule the appointment in their jammies. Again, would be confined by our availability, but it wasn't dependent upon having to call somebody to get it done. All those kinds of changes resulted in a very different kind of experience, where providers do walk into the waiting room to grab patients for primary care visits, where those visits occur 97% of the time within 3 minutes of the scheduled time, to my point of being on time. All of those kinds of things enabled the brand to be attractive enough where Tom could say, we're still going to charge you your insurance for the clinical services, but we're going to charge you a membership fee to just have the same day, next day access, the use of our app, the communication platform our app provides, all the curated content. We're going to charge you a membership fee. And that started at $49 before e-commerce. They just sent in checks. Today, it's now bundled into an add-on to the Prime membership at Amazon. So it has all the power of Amazon. Amazon saw the value of this, and they bought them for $4 billion.
Wow. Wow. As a therapist, I can tell you from experience that having the right EHR is an absolute lifeline. I recommend using Therapy Notes. They make billing, scheduling, note-taking, telehealth, and e-prescribe incredibly easy. Best of all, they offer live telephone support that's available 7 days a week. You don't have to take my word for it. Do your own research and see for yourself. Therapy Notes is the #1 highest rated EHR system available today, with a 4.9 out of 5 stars on trustpilot.com and on Google. All you have to do is click the link below or type promo code Joe on their website over at therapynotes.com and receive a special 2-month trial absolutely free. Again, that's therapynotes.com, and use promo code Joe on the website. If you're coming from another EHR, Therapy Notes will also import your demographic data quick and easy at no cost, so you can get started right away. Trust me, don't waste any more of your time and try Therapy Notes. Just use promo code Joe at checkout. I mean, I feel like AI is reshaping so much, on a simple level, having AI progress note type of things, lots of great service providers where it listens in and can help do a progress note, the bane of most therapists' existence, and other HIPAA compliant things. Do you feel like AI is going to actually help that personal connection? Do you think it's going to hurt? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it more nuanced than that?
Yeah, it's somewhere in the middle. I think, we have data to show that all of the advent of technology has increased interpersonal loneliness. So there's no doubt people feel like their social skills are decreasing as a function of AI. There's, some early evidence to say that some of our cognitive abilities may be starting to atrophy because we're over reliant on some of these technologies. So there's some risk. I mean, I don't think this comes without a downside. Now, obviously, the benefit of changing our workflows and streamlining some of our processes is huge. But even some of the early data on that, you might not have to draft a note, but you often have to go in and revise a note. And are you saving quite as much time as you think? Probably not quite as much time, but the task load changes, and that may make it more pleasurable. All that said, in the grand scheme of things, I am a big proponent of blending these things together, knowing when to use what, being the human that oversees it, not putting it on autopilot in the AI space. We need emotional intelligence to counteract artificial intelligence.
Mm. I mean, tell me about that shift for people from being truly relational, wanting to be truly relational, and going from transactional into being truly relational.
I think anytime you can put a technology in front of somebody that decreases their effort, enables them convenience, then you should seriously consider it. If it enables you to do more so that you can be more available, to be more relational, then this is a good tool. If, however, it is a way of avoiding delivering a relational connection, it's going to cost you. There are studies right now looking at lifetime value. And if you don't form that emotional connection we referred to earlier, you decrease the lifetime value of most of your clients by about 300%, meaning the likelihood they're going to come back to you for the next course of care goes up immensely. The lifetime value that comes from them referring you to somebody goes up immensely if they feel that your practice has soul. If they feel like your practice has great technology and streamlined and it's cool and fabulous, that keeps you in the competitive set, but it's not a differentiator and it's certainly not a loyalty builder.
Mm, mm. When you're kind of looking ahead into kind of the future with automations, like what human skills do you think will actually be more valuable in the future?
I'm going to stay with emotional intelligence for the now. I think that the ability for AI to truly understand what people want, need, and desire at an emotional level is just not there. It tries to do that. It provides personalization by understanding patterns and use cases, but it doesn't personalize. It doesn't demonstrate welcoming. It doesn't demonstrate gratitude in any authentic kind of way. And so I think the more we understand our emotions, leverage them for good, help our clients manage their emotions effectively, that's the unique space. And while I do have friends of mine who literally are using ChatGPT as their therapist today, who literally put them in a position of giving them the entire scenario building, telling about their marital problems, whatever it might be, and then getting this back and forth that's just anticipatory AI skills. I can't imagine it really replacing the thing that we've been trained to do in that rapport building, assessment, treatment planning, referrals sort of space that most of the folks in your audience are in.
Yeah. I think a lot of the listeners, are trained clinically. And then when they think about kind of making a jump into helping businesses, they're like, who am I? I don't have an MBA. They may even have a doctorate in psychology, but they just feel like, what do I even have to offer? Now you've made that jump into like helping huge businesses. And I'm just curious, like, how can someone make that kind of jump into working with bigger businesses or even small businesses locally?
Yeah, I got a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Southern California. My dissertation was on family systems, right?
Mm.
And what I really, focused on and what are the subdynamics, the backstory, the history of all these subcomponent parts and how do they come together to create a unified, healthy family, right? So that was the key. That application was just you had to put it on steroids at scale when you're talking about a company the size of Starbucks, right? But the concepts are still the same. You have to factor in all of the different want states of all these different individuals. You have to factor in their backstories and their history. You have to define what it is success looks like. What does done look like? As Brene Brown might say. And then how do you help people develop the skills, tools, and use the processes available out there in the system to be effective? And that's been my journey at the C-suite, and then helping the C-suite do it at the management level and ultimately bring that into life in the experience of the customer.
Yeah. So like take a Starbucks. Like what does a company like that say? Like, all right, Joseph, we want to hire you for this. Here's the outcomes we're looking for. Like what does that look like in regards to these companies, what their ask is?
Yeah, I mean, you frequently will get asks like, we want to have an increased number of our new customers coming through referrals. So we need to have to identify who are the people we can activate to get referrals. Who is a advocate of our brand sufficient that if we could help them see the importance of saying our word and our name in the public square, it would really help us out. What are the things that drive people becoming referral sources for us, or at least being highly engaged customers for us? What can we do less of that gets in the way of creating an experience? I think this is a pretty important one. You just keep adding on new things. Sometimes it creates a lot of clutter for your clients. So what are they seeing, thinking, feeling, doing as they arrive at all the high value touch points? What are the high value touch points? What predicts future engagement? They may be satisfied today, but is that satisfaction a predictor? Is reduced effort a predictor that they're going to be with us tomorrow? So a lot of those dynamics are what's in play in the day-to-day life of a former psychologist turned organizational consultant at scale.
I mean, what are some of the skill sets that, like, if someone says, "Man, I want to be like Joseph in 5 or 10 years. I want to be doing this kind of level of stuff." Like, what should they be doing now to position themselves to actually have a Starbucks level company say, "Yeah, I want to work with that person," or "I want to hire that person," or like, what does that experience even look like to get to that point in the next, say, 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, if you want to be like me, you should perform your own self-mental status exam, I think, because that's a questionable objective. But if you really want to get to consulting in this kind of space, I think the first off is understand business. Understand what creates value in business. What are the value drivers in your own business? How do you increase that? How do you figure out how to market your value? How to create and craft solutions for your business? How do you make sure that you are able to be financially viable? You got to learn all of those truths. So starting with your own business is a good place. I'd look at your journey. I think I'd rather be you, because you developed it in your own practice. Then you were able to grow the practice in such a way that you could sell it handsomely, and in the process learn all those mechanisms so you could transfer that out to other people. It is helpful if you can run a successful business if you're going to try to tell other people to do it. Now, I know the old days in mental health, we used to say that the TV repairman didn't need to have an operational TV, so a mental health professional didn't necessarily need to be mentally healthy. I think that's come a long way. You better be able to do it, to teach it. And I think that's the beginning stage. Once you've got that down, then you need to start doing it on small clients, and then building your path up to the larger clients. My first client was the Pike Place Fish Market in Seattle, Washington, 1,400 square feet of retail space. So that's where I started. And obviously my clients are a bit bigger these days.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to just like book deals, I got one with HarperCollins, and I have my own thoughts on how to make that happen. If someone says, I want to write some books, like any tips on just being an author, being known, getting book deals, anything like that?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's impossible to start and write a book if that's your goal. I think you should become a thought leader, create lots of content, think about what a book might look like with that content, bring that content together, all those small writings, create a confluence into something. Obviously, when you have an idea, you have to pitch book companies. I was fortunate that they came to me, but in the modern age, I think you probably should look, books like How to Write a Book Proposal by Larson, and really understand the mechanics of that. What do you need to do in terms of pitching your marketing plan? Why should people read your book? What is it similar to? How is it different than? Write a sample chapter or two, write a bunch of chapter outlines so people understand it's not a pamphlet but a book. And then you can start pitching it. And you can pitch it either through an agent or directly to publishers. If you have enough of a platform, and you create a great audience, it's pretty easy to pitch. It's a lot harder if you say, oh, I've got 25 followers on X and 15 on LinkedIn, to say, but I've got a great idea, because they want to join a parade, not create one for you these days.
Yeah, I'm with you. It seems like part of it is that they're buying an audience that already trusts you, that wants to buy your book to begin with, and then saying, let's expand upon that.
Yep. Yeah. And I think just don't expect a lot of money from writing books early on. When you create that following and you demonstrate your performance, then you're going to do better on advances and percentages on the back end. Otherwise, self-publishing is a very viable option, where print on demand gets you about 60% of the proceeds of the book that you're about to sell. You just don't have a distribution channel, and they're only going to print books when people buy them. So it's a very different phenomena. And just all of that, you can start. I'm available to reach out to. I don't charge people to try to help them get along a path of thought leadership, because I think it's important that we all advance our knowledge base in constructive ways.
So awesome. The last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I just want them to know that this is a sacred profession that you are in. You are changing lives at the most fundamental level. There has never been a time in history, I think, where people have needed what you do more. So let's make sure that you package all of that in a wonderful experience, and that you don't let down the quality of your clinical care by the bumpiness of the journey it takes to access it.
So awesome. Joseph, if people want to get this new book, All Business is Personal, any of your other books, where should we send them?
Well, you can go to my website, josephmichelli.com, or any good bookstore. That's what I say. If my books are in them, it's got to be a good bookstore. Amazon's an example.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you, Joe.
It's so interesting interviewing, now we're at over 1,200 interviews, and these thought leaders that are doing amazing things. Like, I have seen Joseph's book all over the place. Like, I feel like the Starbucks book, when that came out, I remember seeing that in, I don't know if it was an airport or a bookstore. But to just realize that Joseph's steps are just one in front of the other. That he grew this. He's a person that has value, that says, go back to doing the work yourself first. Oftentimes we're looking for these blueprints that are just big, quick life hacks. But a lot of it is just saying, what's the next thing that I'm going to work on, and how do I keep working on that? And so as we learn with people like Joseph, we'd love for you to be in community with us. We have our whole Practice Academy that you can have access to over at practiceofthepractice.com/membership. You can get access to the tracks on sustainable solo practice, group practice launch, and being a sustainable group practice. So all sorts of things over there. We also couldn't do this show without amazing sponsors like Therapy Notes. Therapy Notes is the best electronic health records out there. They will help you switch over from your current EHR. They also give you 2 months for free, or just money off if you use promo code Joe at checkout. They are phenomenal. They help with automated billing. It's going to make it easier to outsource your billing. So many reasons to switch to Therapy Notes. Just head on over to therapynotes.com, read about it, and at checkout, just use promo code Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.